Alright, hello everyone. Welcome back. Alright, so we're going to get started. I have a very brief primer on basically software development. So software development is sort of this new series of things this new series of lectures that we created, this IIB. And it's basically about like the mechanics of actually writing code. Yeah, it's something that I think a lot of times we take for granted, but it's useful to just throw it out there. So a lot of you will probably have seen these things before, and that's completely fine. We're going to jump into Node in like 25 minutes or so. For those of you who haven't, hopefully this is a reasonable introduction to just like some of the most ridiculously common things, i.e. text editors and Git and things like that. So yeah, software development. So yeah, basically I'm just going to answer two questions: how to write code and how to collaborate. And so the first thing that I hope everyone has is a text editor. Right? Everyone has a text editor. And by a text editor, I don't mean Microsoft Word. I'm not kidding. If you try to write HTML in Microsoft Word, you will be very sad. And you will get a Word document instead of anything that your browser will even try to open. So we use Sublime. You can use whatever you want. I know a lot of people start off with Notepad and all these these Code Academy things are like, oh, you could just use Notepad. And Notepad's great until you have 30 files and you want to do a search through all of them. And the Notepad becomes really crappy. So I suggest getting Sublime. It'll be like about a month before they start bugging you to buy it. And while I don't offer legal advice, you can just continue to close the little window that tells you to buy it. And nothing will happen. You can do really cool things in Sublime, like install syntax checkers, and you can even build things, although most of our tools aren't really compiled languages, so that doesn't matter as much. You can also, if you really feel like it, fight with Eclipse and install plugins for JavaScript and stuff in Eclipse. But pretty much everyone on the staff uses Sublime. Go ahead and give it a try. It's pretty awesome. You probably also heard at least one of your friends have this big religious war among the computer scientists, which is the Vim or Emacs. It's kind of like in and out or Five Guys. Clearly in and out is superior. Just like how clearly Vim is superior, but there always exists. But there exists some of us who really want to cling on to the old, cumbersome, difficult to use tools where it's easier to build pinball than it is to actually write text. But all joking aside, you'll probably want to get familiar with one of these, and I think it's pretty clear which one I think you should use. But even though you might not write all of your code in Vim all the time, sometimes you'll find that you do something and all of a sudden this big Vim window pops up and you're like, oh my god, how do I get out of this? And if you've never seen Vim before, or if you have seen Vim before, you'll know that it's not intuitive how to get out of Vim. It's even less intuitive how to get out of Emacs. Just sort of take your terminal and close it and hope for the best. While I'm talking about these things, you will make a new friend. It's called the terminal. How many people have used the terminal? Okay. For those of you who haven't, don't be scared of it. It looks either like computers from the 80s or a poor Hollywood attempt at making people look like hackers. In fact, it's actually one of the most useful tools that you will have. As you'll see in the next lecture, a lot of our tools will run in the terminal. Mostly get familiar with just navigating around it, basic commands. There's tons of guides out there for how to use them, and then just play with things like ls and cd. Just don't do obviously wrong things like rm and then -rf. Even though it's like, are you sure you want to do this? To use -f to make me not warn you. Okay, -f. Yeah. So use the terminal. It's good. It's good for you. Cool. So what I really want to talk about for like the next little bit is this tool that it is becoming more and more common, and for the purposes of 6.4a, we're basically forcing you to use it. This thing called Git. And Git is a version control system. And so you say, okay, Charles, why are you forcing me to use a version control system? Why can't I just, fire up my computer and be like, my website version 1? And then when you want to go ahead and change, you say, okay, well, I'm going to save that as my website version 2. And you go there, and pretty soon by the end of IP, you have my website version 128, and you have no idea where you introduced the bug, and then your life becomes really miserable as you open each version of your website and try to figure that out. And then you're like, okay, well, I'm okay. I'm gonna version my files. And I say, okay, cool. Now you're gonna work in a 3-person team. And so you're like, okay, well, that's fine. I'm gonna, put these files on Dropbox and share my Dropbox with my teammates, and everything's gonna be great. Until you start to, two of you decide to work on the same file, and then you have this race to see who saves first, and then the person who saves second. Well, I guess you have a race to see who saves second, because the person who saves second just obliterates everything that the other person did, and then you start fighting with each other, and you think you're bad. Or one day the gods might just not be very pleased with you and your teammates, and just destroy all of your computers, and all of a sudden your 3 weeks worth of hard work are lost. So that's why we use Git. And if all of these reasons aren't good enough for why you should learn how to use Git, it's because basically we're going to force you to use it. And it's also a really useful skill. A lot of companies just assume that you know how to use it, or they'll give you like this 5-minute primer on this as a Git commit, and then send you on your way. So yeah, you should use Git. I'm going to teach basically just the very basic workflow. And I'm going to teach basically about 0.5% of all of the functionality of Git. Git is a horrendously large piece of software, and it has a horrendously large number of features, most of which you will never even know of the existence of. But maybe like 5 or 6 commands are all you need. Cool. So if you haven't installed yet, you should do that. I have a couple of very sort of minor activities that we'll do together later. But if you haven't installed, you should. And if you have installed, we'll move on. So, Git is a version control system. Right? And that means it keeps track of the different versions of your source files. And it literally keeps track of everything. If you commit a file to Git and later decide to delete it, it's actually really hard to delete that file through all of your history. It's basically impossible. Well, not really, but yeah. So it's very likely that's really good, because it's very likely that you can revert things. Right? It's very easy to revert changes. There's actually a few dangerous commands that you can use to destroy everything if you don't know what you're doing. And usually you have to append something that's screaming at you like, hey, this is dangerous. Like git reset -- property. Right? Like that just sounds like a dangerous command. And if it didn't, well, now you know that it's dangerous. Or something like git push -- force. Right? That just clearly sounds like it's not something that you should be doing under normal workflows. So if you try to do something and it's like, this didn't work, use git push -- force to override this warning. You should probably stop and be like, before you do git push -- force. So I was thinking last night, or this morning rather, I was like, what's a good analogy for Git? Like, what's a good analogy if you've never seen any system like this before? Right? You'd be like, oh, it's this thing to track your changes, and you make changes to your files, and your files get bigger, and this thing has a log of all of that, and that's true. So think of it as like a bucket, right? Your repository of your source code is just this big bucket. It's a big bucket of files. And it's like every single time you do something, you add something to that bucket. Now, this is a bucket where you can't pour water out of it. So you can basically only add things in. Right? So as you build your program, you just add more and more things to this bucket. And this bucket contains basically the history of everything that you've ever done. It's also an infinite bucket. And so you're like, this is really silly. Maybe something like time machine, right? Literally versions of your files, backups. You can go back in time very easily and look at what your site was like 3 weeks earlier. But in order to really truly capture the power of what we're working with, I like to think of it as a tree. It's really pretty tree. I wish I could take pictures of that really. And the reason I think of it as a tree is because if you think about the process that you build an application, or anything with like some degree of complexity, trying to do something, you're probably going to try something, and it's either going to work or it's not, right? And you're going to try a lot of these things. And so basically what ends up happening is you have like one big line of this is what my application is going to be. Like if I had to turn in my 6470 project today, this is what it would be. And then you have a bunch of random things branching off the sides. And that is really where the power of Git comes in. And it allows you to really manage these things really easily. And yeah. So how do you start? So basically, we're going to create a repository for you after milestone 1. And all you have to do is do git clone. And you take the repository and you clone it. And basically what that does is it takes everything that's on GitHub, which I'll talk about in just a second, and it copies it to your machine. Right? If you make some changes, you do git add, and then followed by git commit. And you just do git commit -m with a message to tell your teammates and yourself what you've done. How many people have used command line git before? Just curious. Okay, so about half. How many people have used Eclipse Git or like the GUI stuff? Is that what WF5 uses nowadays? Command line? Whoops. You nodded to both. Okay. Anyways, so give you guys 2 minutes to do this. Mostly just to test out your installation if you've never done this before. Basically, just go to my repository, clone it, go into it, make some changes, and then commit them. So give you guys like 5 minutes or so to do that. And if you have any problems along the way, just raise your hand and we'll come help you. And this is mostly just to make sure that your installation is all working properly. And yeah, what's up?
Fixes the white and then
It's not in my documents. It might not or you can do it directly. Yes, you can.
Okay, so I'm going to sort of continue a little bit. Just not a little bit, a few last questions. We'll still go around the room and help you get set up. But there's also a couple more things. I want to go over. So, so basically, the last thing that I want to cover is just how do you collaborate, right? So, when we provide you and your team with your repository, we're going to give you this repository, and it's going to be hosted on the same GitHub, or github.mit. And basically, that's just a website which contains a central sort of store of all of your code that you push to. And in order to make changes to this central website, the idea being after your changes are reflected up there, your teammates can go on there and get those changes that you've made. And so there's no need for y'all to sit in a room, shout at each other, when you can update your code to here, and that's sort of like the correct version of your code. So you won't be able to do this with my demo repo because obviously I'm not going to let you push to my GitHub. But if you, basically the two commands that are relevant here are just git push and git pull. You push to update GitHub and you pull to get changes from GitHub. Pretty straightforward. One thing, some of you might be like, well, what happens if this stuff happens? Sometimes you'll do a git pull and things won't go well. Basically, that happens when you and your teammate modify the same line different ways, and gets like, well, how do I actually combine their changes together? There's no sort of algorithmic way that they can do that, so it forces you to make that decision manually. So if you ever see something, your Git tell you like auto merge conflict, or if you ever look at a file and you see a bunch of things that look like angle brackets, equal signs, things that are clearly not code, you know what's going on. Basically, just don't freak out. You'll see the differing changes, and you'll have to select which one you want to keep, or combine the two somehow. Alright. So earlier I said that Git was like a tree, right? And nothing that we've done so far really looks like a tree. And that's because we haven't really used branches yet. And branches, as I said, are basically just times when you want to try out something new, and you don't want that to affect what you've been doing. Right? So, if my history looks like this, like let's say this is my team working on some website, and these are each the individual changes. So maybe I created a folder here, I added the home page, I updated some buttons and stuff like that. And I want my team to be able to continue doing whatever they're doing, but I want to work on some brand new feature that's probably, it might break things for a long time, it might just be experimental. I can create a branch and make my own changes separately. And that's sort of where the power of Git comes in, is that not only does it allow you to collaborate, it also allows you to just branch out and sort of do whatever you want. And the cool thing is, after maybe you're here and you're like, okay, this feature that I've made right here is stable. It's something that we actually want in our application. You can take these and merge them back together. And so now, if anyone were to look at this single commit right here, they would see all of the work that's happened in addition to all of the features that you've created. So you don't have to use branches. I recommend that you do. It's a really nice way to just keep your code clean and separated. But again, you don't have to use them. If you do, 3 useful commands. Again, just sort of the easy commands that will get you started. And as I had mentioned earlier, after you're done with the branch, you can merge it. So there's this branch that everyone starts with. If you go to the example repository that I just had all of you clone, and you run the git branch command, you'll see it has an asterisk next to master. And that's the default branch. That's just what Git calls the default. And anything that you branch off of, on top of that, if you run git branch, you'll see the branches that you have created, and you can switch between them. And the idea is, after you're done, you go back to master and you say, hey, I'm in master now, and I want to merge that with whatever feature or whatever changes I've made on some other branch. So, the last thing that I want you guys to do, or rather, second to last thing, is to take this example repository that I've given you, and to create a branch and to commit some changes. You can also, take the file. You can create new files if you want. You can commit multiple changes if you want. And I want you to do that with a branch, and I want you to merge that back into master. And then I want you to create another branch, and I want you to merge that back into master, just to get the workflow going. And then I'm going to ask you if you can construct some sort of a scenario or some sequence of edits that will trigger a merge conflict. And if you do that, I'll throw a piece of chocolate at you. So I'll give you 5 minutes to do that, and then we'll wrap it up. And once again, if you have any questions, just raise your hand, and we'll come find you. So I realized there's, if you've sort of never seen Git before, it's a little bit overwhelming. So I'm just going to go over basically everything that I had you do real quick. So just so you can see it happen and see what the expected sort of behavior is. And then hopefully from there you'll like understand what there is to expect. So start off by So I'll start off. Oh, hold on. All right. Okay. Yeah. All right. So I'm gonna start from the very beginning. Can you guys read that in the back? Good. All right. So I'm gonna clone, and it says, okay, it found this URL and it cloned and it created this folder. So, you know, if I were to look at this, you can see that this folder has been created by Git, and this is literally, it makes a complete clone of what there is on GitHub, like on the website. So I'm going to go into the folder, view it, and you'll see it has two files. And if you open one of these files, it'll tell you to edit it. So I'm going to use Vim. You can also just open it with whatever text editor you want and save it. So, hello world, edit. Okay. So, I'm going to do 2 lines of changes here and close it. Right? And now, if I ask Git for the status of my repository, you'll see it tells us a couple things. There are changes. I've just made some changes that have not been committed yet, and it tells me exactly what files those changes are in. And a useful little command that you can use is this thing called git diff, which shows you that, you know, here I've added these 3 lines, the empty line and the 2 lines of text that I put in. Okay. And so, as I promised, git add, git commit, and you can see the log here. It'll tell me that I've done this. Okay. So this was part 1. This is just basically add and commit. And so if you're working by yourself and you're making changes, these are the sort of changes that you'll be making. Every time you reach some sort of stopping point, you know, you'll add your file, you'll commit them, and it'll create a new record of what you've done. So now let's say I want to branch, right? Let's say, so if I look at branch, I have one branch, it's called master, it's the default branch. if I want to create something, let's call it feature 1. It's telling me I have 2 branches, master and feature 1, and the asterisk tells me the branch that I'm currently working on, so it's still on master. Well, so maybe I want to go to this branch. And if I open up this file again, you'll see since I created the branch after I committed my previous changes, you'll see that these changes sort of persist when I create a new branch. So I'm going to add my feature. And then, right. So I'm going to add this feature. If I look at the log here now, right, you can see the original thing I did, the added 2 lines or whatever, and adding the feature here. So you can imagine how, as you're developing your application, you go on this branch, you add a bunch of features, and at the very end of it, you say, okay, I'm going to go back to my master branch, and you can ignore this stuff for now. Go back to my master branch and say I want to merge. And basically, what this command will do is it merges the 2 right here. So if you imagine this thing right now being more like, imagine this thing sort of right now being like this, and this was my added line. What I'm going to do is I'm going to basically bring these out here and create a new commit that merges the 2 of them. And so I should do that. It should happen without any changes. And then if I look here at master, you'll see that it has added everything. So basically now I've sort of synced up my 2 branches. Any questions so far about this before I just do the fun conflict thing really quickly? It will merge into whatever branch you happen to be on. So you'll see here I made a point to do checkout master first before I did the merge. So it'll always merge into the branch that you're currently on, which is something that you should, before you merge, you should probably check what branch you're on. Cool. So now I'm going to try to introduce a conflict just for fun, and so you can see what it does. So let's create this file. Actually, let's do this. In master, I'm going to create this thing called file2.txt, and in it, it's just going to say master. And then on this feature branch, I'm also going to create what? Oh, wait, I might be. I'm really bad at this. Right, of course, because I haven't committed it, so it's just sort of this file sitting in my file system, and it's not actually doing anything. That was really silly. So I'm going to add this file. All right. Now, if I check out this, and if I still see this, I'm going to be really sad. Okay, cool. So again, I created a new file. I'm actually just going to. So here I have the 2 that I originally created and the file2 on feature branch. And then here I have the 2 and the file2 on master. So what's going on here? I started off on the same place. And then on each of my 2 branches, I created one commit that created the exact same file, but the contents of them are different. And so as you can expect, when I try to merge these 2 together, Git will basically say, I have no idea what to do. Right? Which file do I take? Do I combine them? Do I not? And I'm hoping Git isn't smart enough to combine them. So we'll see what happens. Git merge. Boom. Okay, cool. So you can see here it says, I have 2 files that are called the same thing. They have different things in them. The automatic merging is going to fail. And if I look at file 2, here's where you get the dreaded horrible looking, angle brackets, equal signs everywhere. And this is basically Git telling me, here's one side of your conflict, it did this. here's the other side of your conflict. It did this. I don't know what to do with it. So maybe my solution here is to sort of combine the two of them. So if I wanted to combine the two of them, then I'll basically edit the file in a way that reflects how I want it to end up. So you also have to delete all of the angle brackets and stuff. And then if I look at status, it'll say you have unmerged, fix the conflicts, and then add them. So I'll add, and then if I do git commit, it'll bring up this big message that says, I'm merging this branch, these were the conflicts. Save that. And if I look at my log again, you'll see both of my commits in each individual branch, as well as the commit that resolved the conflict that I introduced. Cool. Any questions? Don't worry if you didn't understand the whole conflict thing. I just wanted to show you what happens when you do get a conflict, so you're not surprised and really freaked out by all the angle brackets. But that's the basic workflow. This will be more than enough to get you through IUP. So hopefully that makes some sense. Cool. So the last thing that I have is basically, if you have an MIT certificate right now, go to github.mit.edu. Just do it. Do it right now. Because if you don't do it right now, and you try to do milestone 0, and when we create the Git repositories for you, we're going to be really sad. So go to github.mit.edu right now. And that is all I have for you today. So basically, if you want to learn more, I have a couple resources for you. They're definitely not necessary or required by any means, but if you just, if you happen to be fascinated by version control, there's some very interesting things that you can do with it. I realize if you haven't used Git ever before, this was probably a bit overwhelming. Come down here, we'll get you sorted out, or come to office hours, post on Piazza. It's once you get the hang of the 4 or 5 commands that you use every day, it almost becomes second nature. So it just takes a couple of tries before it really starts to make sense. And so that is all I have. We're going to take a quick break, and then David will jump right into Node.js. We'll look at some code, write some servers. It'll be a fun time.